The Valori Empire had conquered 17 star systems in the last 1,000 years. They were proud of this number. They kept records of every species they had crushed, every planet they had taken, every civilization they had erased from existence. Their military was the strongest in the known galaxy. Their technology was centuries ahead of most species they encountered. They believed themselves to be the ultimate predators of the universe. When their long-range sensors detected Earth, they sent scout ships to observe. For 6 months, these ships hid behind the moon and watched humanity. They saw the wars. They saw the poverty. They saw nations pointing nuclear weapons at each other. They saw a species divided by borders, languages, and beliefs. The Valori scouts laughed among themselves. This would be easy. Fleet Commander Torak was a veteran of 11 planetary conquests. He had personally overseen the extinction of 3 species. When he reviewed the data on Earth, he felt almost disappointed. Where was the challenge? These humans still burned dead plants for energy? They had only visited their own moon a handful of times. Their most powerful weapons could barely scratch the surface of a Valori cruiser. He presented his assessment to the Empress herself. Earth would fall in 3 rotations of their home world. Perhaps 2 if the humans were as cowardly as they appeared. The Empress approved the invasion with a wave of her hand. She was already thinking about lunch on Earth. In a small office at the Korean Aerospace Research Institute, Dr. Park Yuna stared at her computer screen with growing horror. She had been tracking a strange gravitational disturbance near Jupiter for the past week. At first, she thought it was an error in her equipment. Then she thought it might be a new asteroid. But asteroids did not move in perfect formation. Asteroids did not stop and change direction. Asteroids did not emit electromagnetic signatures that matched no known natural phenomenon. Yuna was 34 years old. She had spent her entire adult life searching for evidence of extraterrestrial life. She had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl watching science fiction movies with her father. Now that the moment had arrived, she felt only fear. She picked up her phone and called a number she had been given years ago. During a strange meeting with men in dark suits, who had asked her many questions and given her few answers, the number connected on the first ring. General Kim Do-won was 61 years old. He had white hair, a permanent frown, and eyes that had seen too much death. For 30 years, he had led a secret division of the military that officially did not exist. His job was simple. Prepare for a threat that most people believed would never come. He had been mocked, ignored, and underfunded. But he had never stopped working. He had never stopped believing. When Yuna explained what she had found, Kim closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and began issuing orders. Within an hour, governments around the world were receiving encrypted messages. Most of them thought it was a joke. Some of them panicked. A few of them understood. The United Earth Defense Council had existed only on paper for 2 decades. Now, in a matter of days, it became real. Representatives from every major nation gathered in secret locations. Old enemies sat across tables from each other and tried to find common ground. It was messy. It was slow. But it was happening in Seoul. Engineer Baek Ji-woo was working late at her laboratory. When soldiers arrived at her door, she was 29 years old, brilliant, and annoyed at being interrupted. Her annoyance turned to shock when they showed her what they had brought. 3 years ago, a fishing boat in the Pacific Ocean had pulled something strange from the water. It was small, metallic, and covered in symbols that matched no human language. The government had kept it secret, studied it in underground facilities, and made almost no progress understanding it. Now they were giving it to Ji-woo. She had 72 hours to figure out how it worked. She had 72 hours to find anything that might help humanity survive what was coming. Ji-woo looked at the alien device and felt something she had not felt since she was a child, pure wonder. Then she pushed that feeling aside and got to work. The Valerie fleet entered Earth's solar system on a Tuesday morning. 300 warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built. They passed Mars without slowing down. They ignored the satellites and space stations orbiting Earth. They were not interested in these primitive toys, Fleet Commander. Torak stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the blue planet grow larger on his view screen. It was a beautiful world, he admitted, rich in water, blessed with a temperate climate. It would make an excellent colony once the native population was eliminated. He ordered his communications officer to broadcast the standard message. Every species received the same offer: surrender unconditionally or face complete destruction. Most species surrendered. The ones who did not were erased. The message was translated into every human language and broadcast on every frequency. It interrupted television programs, radio stations, and phone calls. Across the planet, 8 billion people heard the same words at the same time. Humanity had 48 hours to surrender. General Kim watched the broadcast from his command, centered deep beneath the mountains. Around him, officers were shouting into phones, analysts were running calculations, and screens were displaying feeds from every corner of the globe. The world was in chaos. Riots had broken out in a dozen cities. Stock markets had crashed. Religious leaders were calling for prayer. Kim felt strangely calm. He had imagined this moment so many times that living it felt almost normal. He turned to Yuna, who had been brought to the command center to help interpret the alien signals. "Can we talk to them?" he asked. Yuna shook her head. "The broadcast is one way. They are not interested in conversation." Kim nodded slowly. He had expected as much. The aliens had looked at humanity and seen weakness. They had seen a divided, primitive species that would crumble at the first sign of pressure. They had made the same mistake that so many conquerors throughout human history had made. They had underestimated their enemy. Kim picked up a secure phone and called the leaders of every major nation. The conversations were short. The decisions were made quickly. For the first time in human history, every country on Earth agreed on something. They would not surrender. They would fight. And if they died, they would make sure the enemy remembered them forever. 40-8 hours later. When the deadline passed and no surrender came, Fleet Commander Torak was confused. He checked his equipment to make sure the message had been received. The humans had simply chosen to ignore it. He shrugged his massive shoulders and gave the order to begin the attack. These primitives would learn their mistakes soon enough. He had no idea how wrong he was. The first beam of light came from the sky at exactly 9 in the morning, Korean time. It struck São Paulo, Brazil, and erased the city from existence. There was no explosion, no mushroom cloud, no warning. One moment, 12 million people were living their lives. The next moment, there was only a crater filled with glass and ash. 11 more beams followed in the next 90 seconds. Mumbai, Lagos, Shanghai, Moscow, Los Angeles, Cairo, Tokyo, London, Paris, Sydney, Berlin. Each beam lasted only 3 seconds. Each beam killed millions of people instantly. 40 million human beings died before most of the world even understood what was happening. Fleet Commander Torak watched the destruction from his bridge with satisfaction. This was the standard procedure. Destroy the major population centers first. Break the enemy's will. Show them the price of resistance. In his experience, most species surrendered after the first wave of attacks. The few who did not were too weakened to offer meaningful resistance. He expected to receive surrender messages within the hour. He ordered his officers to prepare the ground forces for landing. Soon, Earth would belong to the Valori Empire, in the command center beneath the mountains. General Kim watched the death toll climb on his screens. The numbers were so large that they stopped feeling real. Millions became just a word, a statistic. He forced himself to remember that each number was a person, a mother, a father, a child, a story that would never be finished. His phone rang. It was his wife, calling from Busan. She told him she loved him. She told him to be strong. She told him to save as many people as he could. The line went dead mid-sentence. A few seconds later, his screen showed that Busan had been hit by a second wave of attacks. Kim stared at his phone for a long moment. Then he put it in his pocket and turned back to his officers. There was no time for grief, not yet. Maybe not ever. Captain Lisora was at sea when the attacks began. She commanded the aircraft carrier Dokdo, one of the pride of the Korean Navy. When she received the news of the attacks, she gathered her crew on the flight deck. 2,000 men and women stood in silence as she told them what had happened. Some of them cried, some of them prayed, some of them simply stood in shock, unable to process the scale of the destruction. Sora did not cry. She did not pray. She had lost her parents in Seoul, her sister in Busan, her best friend in Tokyo. She had lost everything except her ship and her crew. And she would use both to make the enemy pay. She received new orders that night. Operation Hornet's Nest was authorized. All conventional restrictions were lifted. She understood what this meant. They were no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to hurt, to bleed, to make the enemy understand that Earth would never be taken easily. Across the planet, humanity responded to the attack in ways that surprised everyone, including themselves. Old enemies stopped fighting each other. Countries that had been at war for decades declared immediate ceasefires. Political leaders who had spent years insulting each other now worked together in the same rooms, planning the same counterattacks. Dr. Park Yuna, watching the global response from the command center, felt tears running down her face. Not from sadness, but from something else. Pride, maybe. Or hope. She turned to General Kim. They wanted us divided, she said quietly. They have made us one. Kim nodded, but said nothing. He was already thinking about the next move. The Valori ground forces began landing 2 days after the initial attack. Massive transport ships descended through the atmosphere, each one carrying thousands of elite warriors. These soldiers had conquered worlds. They had never known defeat. They expected to find frightened civilians hiding in ruins. Waiting to be captured or killed, they found something very different. In the ruins of Incheon, a young woman named Han Murray crouched behind a collapsed wall. She was 19 years old. 2 days ago, she had been a university student, studying Korean literature. She had been worried about her exams, her part-time job, her complicated relationship with her mother. Normal problems for a normal life. That life was gone now. Her university was ash. Her apartment building was rubble. Her mother had been in Seoul when the first beam struck. There was nothing left of her to bury. Mireille held a weapon in her hands. It was a Valerie plasma rifle, taken from a dead alien soldier by a group of resistance fighters. She did not know how to use it properly. She barely knew which end to point at the enemy, but she was going to fight anyway. Beside her crouched Sergeant Choi Tai-ho, a 40-year-old man who had been a baker until last week. He had large hands that were better suited for kneading bread than holding weapons. But those hands were steady now. His eyes were calm. He had lost his bakery, his home, and 3 of his 4 children. His surviving daughter was somewhere in the south, hopefully safe. He was fighting so she could stay that way. Their unit had 12 people. A teacher, a doctor, a taxi driver, a grandmother who refused to evacuate. None of them were soldiers. All of them were ready to die. The Valori patrol came around the corner without caution. They were not expecting resistance. Their armor gleamed in the morning light. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never been prey. Tai-ho gave the signal. 12 humans opened fire at once. The battle lasted 47 seconds. When it was over, 9 aliens lay dead on the broken street. 2 humans had been killed. The remaining 10 gathered the fallen aliens' weapons, said quick prayers for their dead friends, and disappeared into the ruins before reinforcements could arrive. Similar scenes played out across the planet. In Brazil, farmers used their knowledge of the land to ambush alien patrols. In Germany, factory workers manufactured weapons around the clock, sleeping in shifts, never stopping. In Nigeria, a retired general organized thousands of civilians into guerrilla units that struck the enemy and vanished before they could respond. The Valori had expected to conquer Earth in 3 days. After 1 week, they still did not control a single major city. After 2 weeks, they were losing soldiers faster than they could replace them. Fleet Commander Torak stared at the reports with growing anger. How was this possible? These were primitives. They had no real military, no advanced technology, no hope of winning. Yet they continued to fight. They continued to resist. They continued to kill his soldiers in ways that should have been impossible. He ordered more troops to the surface. He authorized more destructive attacks from orbit. He would crush this resistance, no matter the cost. But deep in his heart, for the first time in his long career, Torak felt something unfamiliar. It took him a while to recognize it. It was doubt. The Valori soldier was 3 meters tall and covered in armor that could stop a tank shell. His name was Viaran, and he was a veteran of 6 planetary conquests. He had killed hundreds of enemy combatants across a dozen worlds. He had never felt fear in battle. He felt it now. The human in front of him was small, female, young. She held a broken piece of metal pipe in her hands. Her face was covered in dirt and dried blood. Her clothes were torn. She should have been easy to kill, but her eyes. There was something in her eyes that made Viaran hesitate. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was something he had never seen in the eyes of a conquered species. It was rage. Pure, burning, endless rage. Marae swung the pipe at the alien's head with all her strength. The blow did almost nothing. The alien laughed and raised his weapon. But in that moment of laughter, he did not see the other human coming from behind. Taiho drove a stolen alien blade into the gap between the creature's armor plates. The alien screamed and fell. Marae finished him with 3 more strikes to the head. They did not celebrate. There was no time. More enemies would come soon. They stripped the body of weapons and supplies and moved on. This was what war on Earth had become. Small groups of humans fighting in the ruins of their cities, using everything they had against an enemy that should have been impossible to defeat. They could not win an open battle. They could not match the aliens' technology or strength. So they fought in the shadows. They struck and vanished. They made the enemy pay for every meter of ground. In the command center beneath the mountains, General Kim coordinated the resistance. Maps covered every wall, showing enemy positions, human forces, supply lines, and safe zones. Red dots marked areas under alien control. Green dots marked areas of active resistance. There were far more green dots than anyone had expected. Dr. Park Yuna worked beside him, analyzing captured alien communications. She had learned more about the Valori in the past 2 weeks than humanity had learned about any other topic in history. She knew their language, their tactics, their weaknesses. And she had discovered something important. The Valori commanders were connected through something called a neural network, a web of signals that let them share information instantly, coordinate their forces, and respond to threats in real time. It was a powerful system. It was also a vulnerability. Yuna explained her discovery to Kim. If they could disrupt the network, even for a few seconds, the enemy forces would be confused and disorganized. In battle, a few seconds could mean everything. Kim nodded slowly. It was a good plan, but they needed something to cause the disruption. That was where Jiwoo came in. Engineer Beak Jiwoo had not slept in 4 days. Her laboratory was a mess of alien components, human tools, and empty coffee cups. Her hair was tangled, her eyes were red, and her hands shook from exhaustion. But she was smiling. She had figured it out. The alien probe she had been given contained a shield generator, a device that created an invisible barrier around Valori ships and soldiers, protecting them from human weapons. The shield was nearly perfect, nearly invincible. But Jiwoo had found a flaw. The shield operated on a specific frequency, like a radio station. If you knew the frequency, you could create interference. Static. Noise, the shield would not fail completely. But it would flicker, weaken, become vulnerable. She had built a device that could do exactly that. It was ugly. It was crude. It was held together with tape and prayers. It would probably burn out after a single use, but it would work. Kim looked at the device, and then at Giwoo. How many can you make? Giwoo calculated quickly in her head. With the materials we have, maybe 50. If we work around the clock, if nothing goes wrong, Nothing ever goes wrong in war, Kim said dryly. It was almost a joke. Almost, he gave the order. Production began immediately. Across the country, in hidden factories and underground workshops, workers started building copies of GU's device. They did not know exactly what they were making. They did not need to know. They trusted that it would help. They trusted that it would hurt the enemy. That was enough. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Lieutenant Han Murray and her unit continued their war. She had been promoted twice in the past week. Not because of her skill or experience, but because everyone above her had been killed. She was 20 years old now, her birthday having passed without celebration in the ruins of a parking garage. She commanded 37 fighters. Most of them civilians who had picked up weapons for the first time in their lives. They were attacking a Valerie supply depot on the outskirts. Of what used to be Suwon, the depot was guarded by 50 alien soldiers and protected by a shield generator. A normal attack would be suicide. But Murray had received a new piece of equipment, one of Jiwoo's disruptors. She positioned her forces carefully, placing them in buildings and behind rubble, creating a crossfire zone that would trap the enemy. Then she activated the disruptor and threw it toward the depot. The device made a sound like a dying animal. Blue sparks flew from its surface. Then it exploded in a burst of energy that made Moray's teeth ache. For 3 seconds, the depot's shields flickered and died. 3 seconds was enough. Her fighters opened fire with everything they had. Plasma rifles, human-made explosives, even bows and arrows for those who had nothing else. The aliens, suddenly exposed, scrambled for cover. Some of them made it. Most did not. When the shields came back up, the battle was already over. 31 alien soldiers lay dead. The depot supplies, including weapons and medical equipment, were in human hands. Murray had lost 8 fighters. 8 more names she would carry with her forever, but they had won. They had actually won. News of the victory spread quickly through the resistance networks. Similar attacks began happening everywhere. The disruptors were working. The aliens were dying. For the first time since the invasion began, humans started to believe that survival might be possible. Fleet Commander Torak received the reports with growing alarm. His forces were taking losses at an unsustainable rate. His supply lines were being attacked. His soldiers were becoming afraid to patrol alone. He had conquered 11 planets. He had never faced resistance like this. He had never seen a species fight so hard, with so little, against such impossible odds. He began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. But it was too late to turn back. The Empress would not accept failure. The only option was to push forward, to commit more forces. To crush the humans through sheer overwhelming power, Torak gave the orders. More ships descended from orbit. More soldiers poured onto the surface. The war was about to escalate beyond anything either side had imagined. And somewhere in a submarine beneath the Pacific Ocean, Captain Lee Sora was preparing to change everything. The submarine moved through the black water like a ghost. It had been designed for stealth, for silence, for missions that no one would ever know about. Captain Lee Sora stood in the control room, surrounded by her crew of 37 volunteers. They had been underwater for 6 days. They had traveled thousands of kilometers. They were closer to death than any of them wanted to admit. Sora looked at the faces around her, young and old, men and women, sailors who had served for decades and civilians who had joined the crew just weeks ago. All of them had volunteered for this mission. All of them knew they probably would not survive. The target was a Bellori relay station at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, according to Dr. Yuna's intelligence. This station was a critical node in the enemy's neural network. Destroy it, and every alien commander on Earth would experience a moment of confusion. A moment of blindness. A moment that human forces were waiting to exploit. Her executive officer, a serious man named Ko Junho, approached with a tablet. We are 2 hours from the target. Sonar shows enemy patrols in the area. Sora nodded. How many? 3 ships. All larger than us? All faster than us? Can we avoid them? Junho hesitated. Maybe if we go deeper and slower. It will add 4 hours to our approach. Sora considered this. 4 hours was a long time, but being detected was worse.
Do it.
Tell the crew to rest while they can. We will need everyone at their best. She did not mention what they all knew. This was a one-way mission. They had enough fuel to reach the target. They did not have enough fuel to return. Even if they survived the attack, they would die slowly in the cold darkness of the ocean floor. Sora had made peace with this. Her family was gone. Her ship was gone. Her old life was gone. All that remained was the mission. The chance to hurt the enemy. The chance to give humanity a fighting chance. She sat in her cabin and wrote a letter to no one in particular. She wrote about her childhood, her dreams, her regrets. She wrote about the sailors under her command and how proud she was of them. She wrote about hope. Then she sealed the letter in a waterproof container and placed it in the emergency beacon. Perhaps someone would find it someday. Perhaps not. It did not matter. She had said what she needed to say. On the surface, Dr. Yoon Seo-jin was making a discovery of her own. She was a xenobiologist, a scientist who studied alien life. Before the invasion, her work had been purely theoretical. Now she had real aliens to examine. Captured soldiers. Dead bodies. Living prisoners. She worked in a secure facility beneath a mountain, surrounded by armed guards and multiple layers of security. The Valori prisoners were kept in special cells designed to contain their strength. They were questioned, studied, and observed. Seo-jin was not interested in their military secrets. She was interested in their biology, how they thought, how they communicated, how they worked as a species, and she had found something remarkable. The neural network that connected Velour commanders was not just technology. It was partly biological. The aliens had implants in their brains that allowed them to share thoughts and feelings with each other. It was how they coordinated their forces so effectively. It was how they responded to threats so quickly. But it was also a weakness. The connection worked both ways. When a commander died, every other commander felt it. When a commander was afraid, that fear spread through the network. And if something disrupted the network suddenly, every connected alien would experience a moment of intense disorientation. Seo-jin shared her findings with General Kim. The general listened carefully, his tired eyes showing a spark of interest. How long would the disorientation last? He asked. A few seconds at most. Maybe 5 or 6. Their brains would recover quickly. 5 seconds. Kim was quiet for a moment. 5 seconds could change everything. He began planning the counteroffensive that night. Every resistance cell on Earth received new orders. Wait for the signal. When the enemy falters, strike with everything you have. Hold nothing back. The signal came 3 days later.
At
exactly midnight Korean time, Captain Lee. Sora's submarine reached the relay station after a journey that tested every member of her crew. They avoided enemy patrols by hiding in underwater canyons and moving at speeds so slow that the engines barely made a sound. They survived equipment failures, food shortages, and the constant pressure of knowing death was all around them. When they finally saw the relay station on their sonar, Sora felt a strange calm. It was massive. A structure of alien metal and glowing lights sitting on the ocean floor like a sleeping monster. Around it, enemy ships patrolled in lazy circles. There was no way to attack the station without being detected. There was no way to escape after the attack. There was only the mission. Sora gathered her crew one last time. She looked at each of them and saw no fear. Only determination. Only acceptance. Only pride. Today we die, she said simply. But our deaths will mean something. Our sacrifice will give humanity a chance. That is worth more than any of us. The submarine rose from its hiding place and launched every weapon it had at the relay station, torpedoes, missiles. Everything. The enemy ships responded immediately, but they were too slow. The first torpedoes struck the station before they could intercept it. Then the second. Then the third. The station exploded in a burst of blue light that lit up the entire ocean floor. The shockwave hit the submarine like a giant fist, crushing metal and killing sailors instantly. Captain Lee Sora was thrown against the wall of her cabin. Her last thought was of her family, waiting for her somewhere beyond the darkness. Then there was nothing. On the surface, the effect was immediate. Every Valori commander on Earth stopped moving at the same instant. Some collapsed. Some screamed. Some simply stood still, their eyes empty, their minds filled with static. It lasted only 5 seconds, but 5 seconds was enough. Across the planet, human forces attacked. In Korea, Lieutenant Han Mai-rae led 300 fighters against a fortified enemy position. In Africa, guerrilla armies overran alien supply depots. In Europe, civilians armed with makeshift weapons stormed enemy command centers. The aliens recovered quickly. They fought back with their usual ferocity. But they had lost the initiative. For the first time since the invasion began, humans were on the offensive. General Kim watched the battle reports coming in from around the world. Victories, losses, chaos, progress. It was not over. It was far from over. But something had changed. The tide was turning, and deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, in the wreckage of a submarine, a waterproof container drifted slowly toward the surface. Inside was a letter that no one would read for many years. But when they finally did, they would understand. They would understand what humanity had sacrificed, and why. Engineer Baek Ji-woo had not stopped working since the day the invasion began. She had slept maybe 40 hours in the past month. She had eaten whatever food was placed in front of her without tasting it. She had watched colleagues collapse from exhaustion and simply stepped over them to continue her work. But now, finally, she had something to show for it. The device on her workbench was small enough to fit in a backpack. It looked like a mess of wires and alien components held together with human engineering and desperate hope. But it was the most dangerous weapon humanity had ever created. She explained it to General Kim in simple terms. The Velour ships drew power from a central reactor. This power flowed through their systems in a specific pattern, like blood through veins. Her device could reverse that flow, turn the ship's own energy against itself. One moment, everything would be working normally. The next moment, every system on the ship would overload and explode. "One shot," she said. "That is all we get. The device will destroy itself in the process. But if we can deliver it to their flagship, we can end this war." Kim looked at the device for a long time. Then he looked at Ji-woo. "You are certain it will work?" "I am certain it will do something. I cannot promise exactly what." It was honest. It was not reassuring, but it was the best they had. The question became, who would deliver the device? It had to be placed directly inside the enemy flagship, in the core reactor room. This meant someone had to infiltrate the most heavily defended ship in the alien fleet, navigate through corridors filled with enemy soldiers, reach the reactor, plant the device, and activate it. The chances of survival were essentially zero. Lieutenant Mai-rae volunteered before anyone else could speak. She was 20 years old. She had been fighting for 3 months. She had killed more enemies than she could count and lost more friends than she wanted to remember. Her body was covered in scars. Her eyes held a weariness that belonged to someone much older. General Kim tried to refuse her. He told her she was too valuable, too important to the resistance. He told her there were other options, other volunteers. Mai-rae listened politely. Then she said, "I have nothing left to lose. Let me do this. Let me end it." Kim saw the truth in her eyes. He saw a young woman who had already accepted death, who was simply looking for a death that meant something. He wanted to argue more. He wanted to save her, but he knew he could not. He approved the mission. The plan was complex, but simple in its goal. A captured alien ship, piloted by humans who had learned to operate the controls, would approach the flagship during a scheduled supply delivery. Mai-rae and a team of 11 volunteers would be hidden inside. Once aboard, they would fight their way to the reactor core and plant the device. Dr. Park Yuna identified the window of opportunity. During the daily command transition, when one shift of officers replaced another, The flagship's point defense systems would be briefly reduced. The approach would still be dangerous, but it would be possible. The night before the mission, Ray sat alone on the roof of the command center and looked at the stars. She had always loved the stars as a child. She had dreamed of traveling to them someday. She laughed softly. She was about to travel to them in a way, just not the way she had imagined. Ji-woo found her there. The engineer sat beside her without speaking for a while. Then she handed Mireille a small object. It was a photograph, old and faded, showing a young woman with a bright smile. "My mother," Ji-woo said. "She died when I was 12. I have carried this picture ever since. I want you to take it with you." Mireille did not understand. Why? Because she believed in impossible things. She used to tell me that humans could do anything if they wanted it badly enough. I did not believe her for a long time. Now I do. Take her with you. Let her see what we can do. Mireille held the photograph carefully. She did not have words for what she felt. She simply nodded and put the picture in her pocket. The mission launched the next morning. The captured ship rose from a hidden base and headed toward orbit, where the alien fleet waited like a swarm of deadly insects. Inside, Mireille and her team checked their weapons, reviewed their route, and said their silent goodbyes. The approach was terrifying. Enemy ships passed close enough to touch. Scanners swept over them looking for anything unusual. The human pilot, a young man named Shin Dong-yuk, held his breath and maintained their course. They reached the flagship. The docking process took 5 minutes that felt like 5 hours. Then the hatch opened, and Mireille led her team into the enemy vessel. They killed the first guards before the aliens could raise an alarm. They moved through corridors of dark metal and strange lights, following maps that Yuna had created from intercepted communications. Twice they had to hide as enemy patrols passed. Once they had to fight through a checkpoint, losing to team members in the process. They reached the reactor core with 9 people remaining. The door was guarded by a single Valori warrior, larger than any they had seen before. He was an elite guard, assigned to protect the most important part of the ship. When he saw the humans approaching, he roared and charged. Mireille met him head-on. The fight was brutal. The alien was stronger, faster, better armed. He hit Mireille with blows that should have killed her. She felt ribs crack. She felt blood fill her mouth. She felt herself dying, but she did not stop. She used every trick she had learned in 3 months of desperate warfare. She used her small size to avoid his attacks. She used her human ability to ignore pain, to push through damage that would have stopped any sensible creature. She used the knife that Sergeant Choi had given her before he died in a battle 3 weeks ago. The alien fell with that, knife buried in his throat. Mireille crawled toward the reactor, leaving a trail of blood behind her. Her team was gone, all of them dead or dying. She was alone. The device was in her hands. She activated it and placed it against the reactor core. "You made a mistake," she whispered to the ship, to the fleet, to the entire Valori Empire. "You thought we were weak. You did not understand. All our fighting, all our wars, all our history of killing each other, that was just practice." The device began to hum. Energy flowed backward through the ship's systems. Alarms screamed. The walls began to glow. Mireille closed her eyes and thought of her mother, her home, her friends, everything she had lost and everything she was saving. The flagship exploded. The explosion triggered a cascade. Failure throughout the Valori fleet. Reactors overloaded. Ships crashed into each other. In minutes, the greatest military force in the galaxy was reduced to burning wreckage falling through Earth's atmosphere. Of the 300 ships that had come to conquer Earth, only 17 managed to escape. Fleet Commander Torak was not among the survivors. 1 year later, humanity launched its first interstellar ship. It was built from Valori wreckage and human determination. Dr. Park Yuna captained it. General Kim gave the farewell speech. "We did not ask for this war," he said, "but we finished it. And now we are sending a message to every species in this galaxy. Earth is not prey. Earth is not a target. Earth is home to 8 billion people who will fight, who will sacrifice, who will do whatever it takes to protect it. Jiwoo stood in the crowd, watching the ship rise into the sky. In her pocket was a photograph that a young woman had carried into battle. It had been found in the wreckage of the flagship, burned, but still recognizable. She held it up to the sky, letting her mother see the stars one last time. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." Above her, the ship disappeared into the clouds, carrying humanity's message to the universe. They were no longer alone. They were no longer afraid. They were survivors, fighters, and now explorers. The Valori had taught humanity what they could do when, pushed to the edge, the galaxy would never forget the lesson.